Heyo, witchy ones, Reverend Thodwin here again, and today in my YouTube Pagan Challenge topics, I'm doing topics 6 and 7, which are what are my cultural influences and what are my views on mythology and sacred texts. Now I'm going to kind of tackle these as both a joint question and as separate questions because I kind of feel like they're both really related to each other and also separate in their own right. So, without any further ado, if we're going to speak, like, cultural influences as in what is my ancestral cultural influence, and my ancestral heritage is largely Irish. I'm mostly Irish. I'd say probably 70 to 75% Irish. Then I'm First Nations Aboriginal Canadian. I'm from the Mi'kmaq band on in the province of Nova Scotia, and that's where my grandfather descends from on my mom's side, and then the rest is just kind of a hodgepodge of UK, like, English, Welsh. I shouldn't say Scottish as UK, but I mean Scottish, and I might be missing something there. I don't think I am though. But yeah, that is pretty much, as far as I know at least, my cultural background. Now, this has kind of influenced me musically speaking, and to an extent, my spirituality. A lot of my musical influences are derived from Celtic music patterns and rhythms and beats that you would find in traditional jigs and reels and such from Celtic music. And that's pretty much the extent of that. I mean, I do have a lot of appreciation for the Celtic mythology and philosophy. I would by no means consider myself even partially druidic in my practice. I have a book on druidry. I've only gotten like 20 pages into it though. I've never really taken it I've never really looked at the Celtic mythology extraordinarily thoroughly. Like, I know a fair amount about it, but it's never really been a thing that I've gone into at much depth. I know my way around Celtic mythology. I know the basics, like, the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann, and the, probably not saying that, Tuatha De Danann, if I remember my Gaelic properly, and stories of the Sidhe and the Fae and so on. But that's about the extent. However, one of my very, very first intimate experiences with pagan divinity was with the goddess Ceridwen, who is a Welsh goddess. And one of my favorite myths to this day is the tale of Taliesin, of Ceridwen and Taliesin. And that tale kind of goes into, to me, it symbolizes the importance of being able to adapt to what the universe will throw at you, so as to bring about the best possible circumstances to yourself. And it's one of those rare myths where the goddess, the divinity in the myth, almost seems to be the one learning the lesson, but at the same time, if you look at the myth, I recommend it. It's a good story. It's kind of funny. But the human in the myth is also kind of learning something. He's learning how to adapt to better himself, and almost kind of tricks the goddess in a sense, which is ironic because she's the goddess of wisdom and of higher knowledge, right? But anyway, it's one of my favorite myths. But spiritually speaking, my cultural influence has been much more focused towards, to an extent, the Greek pantheon. I am very, very fond of Dionysus and Apollo, which are two seemingly opposite divinities. They kind of represent two hemispheres of Greek thought, but I appreciate them both at least equally. I think they both have really important aspects to the human psyche. Dionysus is more of the chaotic, erotic, celebratory kind of... His story actually is really similar to Jesus, but the attitude is completely different. And Apollo is much more of the structured. If I were to compare them to like the people that you would meet, high school would probably be a good example. The people you'd meet in high school, Apollo would be like the prep, the preppy jock that everyone likes, and Dionysus would be like the really hot badass, but who also kind of has his shit together, and he's kind of charismatic in that sense. And I also have a very large appreciation for Pan, just as being the god of the woods, and Hernia and Cernunnos and the Green Man. So I guess it kind of goes into the Anglo-Saxon bit as well there, and a bit, to a certain extent, Nordic, but not much. If I were to tell you what my most influential, or what my largest cultural influence would be, I'd say for the past 2 years or so, it's been Eastern mythology and Eastern culture. The Hindu pantheon, there's probably a comparable amount of gods to the Indian population itself. And India is no small place in regards to population. It is full of people, as I'm sure everyone knows, and there are so many gods and goddesses in the Indian pantheon, or Hindu pantheon. And to me, it's exciting because there's just always something to learn, and there's so many different religions within Hinduism, because Hinduism is much like paganism. It's not one religion, it's a bunch of different religions, right? And it's so rich in knowledge, and has so many different perspectives on the same thing. There's so many different beliefs, even with the same divinity. And I think that's a really valuable thing to learn about as a pagan, because it gives you that kind of that point of mind, that point of reference, to be able to understand one thing in multiple different ways and kind of reconcile those differences in perspective with each other, because they're all coming back to the same thing, right? And that's a really productive way for me to express my spirituality. I am very, very fond of the god Shiva, and one of my favorite sacred texts is the Sri Rudra, which is basically a description of Shiva and all of his attributes. It's a very, very long chant, and I took it upon myself last year to learn it in Sanskrit. And I love it because it starts off with all the positive attributes and all of the things that he's associated with on a positive note, but then it goes into all the negative things that he's also associated with, and kind of reconciles those things together. Like, Shiva is in everything. Shiva is all. Shiva is the thief. Shiva guards the thief, and Shiva guards the hero. Shiva guards the hunter, and Shiva guards the hunted. It's a very unifying but also dualistic way of looking at the same thing and seeing the divinity within all things. That's why I value Shiva as much as I do, is because he helps me to recognize the divinity within everything, right? Even the parts of life that you don't necessarily like as much as you would other parts. And that's really, really, really helpful to me in my practice. As far as sacred texts go, I really like, again, the Indian perspective and Indian method of the transference of sacred text. It's almost all vocal. It's all verbal, oral tradition. Oral as in spoken, and oral as in heard. The tradition of Vedic chanting is actually the oldest unbroken tradition of oral, the oldest unbroken oral tradition on the face of the planet. It's been going consistently without cease for I think 4 or 5,000 years, possibly longer, and the text has not changed at all. In fact, there's a system to make sure that you don't corrupt even a single syllable is changed. You don't change anything, and it's beautiful. In fact, plants have been proven to grow quicker when Vedic chant is played, and that was in comparison to other forms of music. as well. Classical music has been known for its influences on plant growth, but Vedic chant even surpasses the effects of classical music on plant growth. And to me, that's really interesting. It's very cool. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of what the Vedas have to say at all, but it's just so rich in philosophy and in really, really deep, heady kind of stuff that you really have to meditate on to get. Like, literally, you have to meditate. You have to get into a certain frame of mind to really understand what the rishis were getting at. And that is valuable to me. I like the things that make you have to delve deeper. It's the things that you can't immediately communicate through words, that you have to be introduced to by word, but you ultimately understand on your own. And that is what the Eastern philosophy and Eastern method has opened my eyes to and has helped me with. And that's been invaluable to my practice and my spiritual development as a person and pagan. As for sacred text in general, I find, you see, I don't agree with the idea that any given text is the infallible word of God based on the fact that the text itself says so, because that is one of the most dangerous beliefs to be had in my eyes, that basically justifies anything that the text says, right? I could write something down right now in Theban and say that, you know, stoning this person for that reason is a good idea because this divinity told me so, and then 200 years from now someone could dig it up and think, oh yeah, this is the word of God, it must be true, there's all this evidence for it. It's a very dangerous belief to me, and so I don't subscribe to any sacred text as such. But I still recognize the value within sacred texts, even in the Bible. There's a lot of parts of the Bible you really have to cherry pick, I'll give it that, but there's a lot of parts in the Bible that I do subscribe to, and that I still to this day kind of reference when I'm in like a moral dilemma or something to that effect. The Quran I'm a little bit less familiar with, but I'd like to become more familiar with it. But I know that the Quran also draws from biblical text and Jewish prophets, and I'd like to be able to kind of incorporate some of their philosophy, or at least learn about their philosophy a little bit more. I just find a lot of pagans like to bash on the book religions, namely like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, even Satanism. I consider that a book religion too, because it's still based off of an opposition to a book religion, which is based off of the bargain between Abraham and Jehovah. And to me, that makes it a book religion. They have a Bible, basically. And I don't like the fact that so many pagans bash on Christian sacred texts, and yet propound these... They have this propensity to treat the mythology of the ancient times as if it's some superior form of sacred knowledge. It's not. Have you read mythology lately? According to mythology, gods and goddesses are dicks. They're assholes. And I don't understand how a pagan can possibly bash on Christianity and then proceed to glorify the stories of the pagan gods and goddesses, because they're not much better. Now, there is the understanding that the mythology, especially in like Homer and other poets and authors from ancient Greece, that the mythologies are kind of like an exaggeration, like a caricature, and a humorous exaggeration of the gods and goddesses' attributes to try and get across kind of a point. And that I would kind of agree with, you know? But in regards to like taking the stories literally, pagan gods and goddesses are oftentimes worse than the worst parts of the Bible. And that, to me, just kind of, again, I'm going to use that word, reconciles the issues that book religions have with pagan religions. They can kind of come to a point of agreement in the sense that it's not meant, at least in my eyes, it's not meant to be something that you look at as the role model. It's meant to be something that you look at as exaggerating to get the point across of how important something is. And a lot of followers of book religions obviously don't agree with that sentiment, but that is how I see it. Anyway, so that has been my discourse on sacred texts, mythology, and my cultural influences. I'll be seeing you possibly within the next couple days, but for sure within the next week with the next pagan YouTube Pagan Challenge installation. And thanks for watching yet again. Blessed be. Like, subscribe, comment below, and merry part.